Currently, I only have, so here you can see infantry, cavalry, artillery. Those are your 3 options. And then these are your ships: heavy ship, light ship, galley, transport. So we can click here and we can change the type. Right now I have it set to Latin medieval infantry. The orange square on the top means we are offensive, like when we're attacking, and the green means defensive, morale. So basically, Latin medieval infantry is better at defending than the halberd infantry are. And also, if you hover over them, you can kind of see a bit more information about them, like maneuver. I'll talk about this all later, but also like a little history on them. Generally speaking, it's good to have a balance between offensive and defensive. And by the way, when you're besieging forts and someone attacks you, it's always good to have a bit of defense. So I'm going to stick with Latin medieval infantry. Unlike Victoria II, and especially not unlike Hearts of Iron, you cannot have different types of units. You can only have one type of infantry unit. So I can only have Latin medieval infantry. If I selected halberd infantry now, all my units, which are currently Latin medieval infantry, as we can see by our 1,000 guys here, will change to halberds, and their morale will decrease. They take some time to retrain. So never, ever change unit types when you're in the middle of the war or when you're being threatened by rebels or whatever, because they will destroy your military immediately. It should always be you should always stick to the same one until you're in a stable time, and then you can change if you want. And especially you have to change later on to better tech infantry and things like that. So that's your options. As we can see over here, fire, shock, and the amount of units we currently have. So we have 7,000 Latin medieval infantry, 2,000 Latin knights. Knights are the exact same thing. Here we have a difference between Latin knights and chevauchés. Again, chevauchés are better at offensive. In fact, I actually choose chevauchés because I use cavalry for striking fleeing units, so they're much better at offensive. But if you want, Latin knights are good for a bit of defense as well. Not that much. So I'm going to change it to chevauchés now. So now that I changed it, you can see my morale has gone down a little bit. That's to represent my 2 chevauchés. See, they've changed from Latin knights to chevauchés now. So that's decreased it, and it's going to take me about, I would say, perhaps a month or 2 for them to get back up to full morale. But once they do, they'll have that different shock. They'll be better at shock at attacking, and their morale at offensive will be better. I know someone will eventually ask me about troop composition. So how many infantry do you want to have to cavalry? It's really up to you. For the early game, this is what I'll say. Like before Land Tech 30, remember these are the different levels we're at. Right now we're only at 3. You should usually have an equal amount of infantry to cavalry. Cavalry costs more, so roughly around. You should have a same amount of cavalry to infantry. But always infantry usually are more because they're cheaper. They're kind of like your cannon fodder. You just have more of them, and you can recruit a lot more of them. Later on, though, cavalry kind of decline in importance. Just think historically, especially with cannons, as cannons get better. At the beginning, cannons are used primarily just in siege. They can be used in attacks, although they're not that great when it comes to attacking, like just in battles. But cannons can quickly capture a province for you. Again, remember the fort level, so they can quickly capture that level 1 fort or level 2 fort for you. Eventually, as fort levels get bigger, you're going to need some artillery to not spend years and years besieging a place. So that's how artillery is used for. Right now we cannot, because we have not yet learned how to make cannons. Yeah, real men play as Granada, exactly. But as someone was just saying. But yeah, so cannons are very important, but later on. And at the beginning, they're not that great, but they'll get much better later on. Um, so that's that. Ships, as you can see, you cannot click on them. You have heavy ships, light ships, galleys, and transports. Heavy ships are kind of like your main attacking ships. They're the most expensive, obviously, but they're the ones that actually pack a punch and really do the fighting for you. Light ships are also good, but they're more for just patrolling. They're much faster than heavy ships. They're better at exploring. I would use the light ships for exploring. Currently, we don't have any light ships because we haven't researched the technology for them yet. They're faster. They're cheaper as well, but they're definitely not as powerful as early as heavy ships. Yeah, and then you have galleys. Galleys are a cheap form of offensive, as offensive unit. Really, their advantage is not that great. At the beginning of the game, you can see their shock is larger than Carrack's, but their hull size of the galley is much lower than a Carrack. A Carrack can pack a lot more punch than a galley can. I mean, galley it'll only take a few hits and then it'll sink. Galleys are generally used in the Mediterranean. You'll see them a lot in use at the very beginning of the game, and then they'll disappear pretty much. So, generally speaking, unless you're playing as Venice or maybe the Ottomans or like the Mamluks or North Africans, galleys are not worth it. As Castile, I'm never going to build galleys. I mean, you can if you want to, but really not worth it. Transport, cog, these are how you transport units. Currently, we have 6 of them. If you remember, we have our fleet here. So we have our Carracks. We have 1 galley, and then we have our cogs. Right now we have 6 transport ships. As you can see, we have 11 big ships, 0 light ships, 1 galley, and 6 cogs, 6 transports. So that means I can transport 6,000 troops across the sea if I wanted to attack North Africa. But right now, for example, I could not put my 8,000 men into my fleet because I can only support 6, so I'd have to build more transports. Yeah, and as someone said in the chat, another tip: if you're playing as the Byzantines, they're good to scare off the Ottomans, especially in blockading the Sea of Marmara. So galleys are more useful depending on who you're playing as, like Venice, Liguria, who get an advantage for it. So yeah, so that's that. Down here we have war exhaustion. If you remember, this links directly to war taxes. If we raise war taxes, then our war exhaustion is going to increase. Right now we have no war exhaustion because guess what? We're not at war. But immediately once we start getting into a war, it'll start increasing by, I think, 0.1 per month. And it'll increase over time. And although for short wars, you really don't have to worry about war exhaustion, over time, especially in large wars, this can really kill your economy, start ginormous rebellions. So you want to keep war exhaustion down and stick to short and fast wars as much as you can. Of course, you are going to get into big wars no matter how hard you try. But always remember that keep your war exhaustion down. How much down? I would say about definitely below 10. Once you start going above 10, that's when you're going to start getting some problems. But the limit, you can see right now the limit is 18. Once you go over 18, that's when all hell breaks loose, basically. So you want to keep it below 18 as much as you can. But 10 means that you're really going to start having problems. Keep it below 5, I would say, as much as you can, though. But obviously, once you go over 18, you need to stop the war at all costs. Just grab as much as you can and leave. Yeah. As you can see, currently war exhaustion is decreasing per month because we're not in a war. But war exhaustion, especially once we get to very high war exhaustion, it'll start causing major problems for us in anger, in like rebellion, we'll start getting lower merchants. There's a whole host of different like negatives that you get from high war exhaustion. As someone is just reminding me in the chat, at the bottom here we have land maintenance. If you remember back in income, sorry, monthly expenses, we have military maintenance, which is 3.3. That is the amount we have here. So 2.6 plus 1 does not equal 3.3. Oh, so yeah, so I've increased it all the way to top, so it's 3.6 now. Yeah, but if I decreased it, that's say I decrease it now, it's 2.8. So when you're not at war, you don't have to have this at maximum, but at the same time, you should not have this all the way at a negative. What this means is how high the morale of your troops are. If you remember, I was showing you over here, it's decreased a bit because we've turned our Latin knights into chevauchés. But if we decrease this down to zero maintenance, in a month or so, this will decrease immediately down to 0 as well. Right now, our land is not very big because, like, our expenses are not very big, but they will become very large. Usually, you don't have to pay much for naval, but you'll have to pay a lot for land maintenance, especially as we get much larger, armies. Yes, as someone's talking about their Wales post, yeah, he used it very effectively in that. Land. By the way, when I'm talking about post, I'm talking about Reddit. By the way, so right now we have land, and then we have naval morale. Right now we have higher morale for naval. That's because of our current ruler, our naval maintenance, and our prestige. Right now we have less for land because of our offensive versus defensive is decreasing it. So as you can see here, we have our naval units have a morale of 2.5, while for our land units have a morale value of 0.529. Of course, you can increase this over time from technology. If you remember, if we hover over land, over time, our it doesn't show right here the next ones, but it'll increase our morale of our armies over time. Oh, okay, so you see it's back up to 1 because we're spending full maintenance. If I decrease maintenance, it'll decrease it. So if I go back and forth, see it's gone. If I put it up to full max, see right now it's at 1. I come back, 2.5 because I have it at maximum maintenance. So basically the rule of thumb, keep it at maximum. Obviously, when you're at war, you always want to have your troops at maximum morale as much as you can. So that's that. But when you're at peace, you can decrease this maybe around, minimum like halfway, but usually just around 80%. Why I say this? Because if I had this all the way down, like all the way down here, and Aragon declared war on us, we won't be able to reinforce our maintenance until like the next 2, 3, or maybe 4 months till we get back to full strength. They'll be able to crush our armies and destroy us. So always keep this at around 80%. And if someone declares war on us, we can immediately put it up to 100, and in a month we'll be at full fighting force again. Because, by the way, morale changes monthly, not daily. Naval, exactly the same thing. Except naval, you can always keep this at 100%, if only because it costs us so little. Over here, we can see total and support limit. This means we have a total of 9,000 land units, but we can support an army of 31,000. This depends on several different things, but right now our feudal monarchy is giving us a plus 20% to the base of 26.5 support limit. There's different people you can hire and different national policies you can have to increase this. So support limit is very important. If you go over it, you're going to start paying a lot more money, and you're going to have decreased morale. Basically, think about any army that, like Russia's, ginormous army, poorly maintained. That's one example. So that's support limit. So always keep your total amount of troops underneath or the same amount of your support limit, and therefore you won't have problems. The exact same thing for naval.